Good morning and welcome back to this series on audit control, governance, risk, and compliance. This is series 2. We are now in the European Union Artificial Intelligence Act video. This is part 2 of the video, and I am your host Savit Vittal Salian. In the part 1, we had covered the top view of the act, the background, the trigger points. In this, we will be looking at certain chapters which defines the specifics of the categories, namely the prohibited, the high risk, the general purpose AI model, penalties, then also the timelines. The full act would be available in the portal. I'll be sharing the link later. It can be downloaded for reference. Thank you. Let's look at the risk-based classification of AI systems as per the EU Act. The first one is categorized as prohibited AI systems. The risk here is categorized as unacceptable risk. It comes under Chapter 2 in specific Article 5. Do note the Chapter 2 Article 5 is applicable from 2nd February 2025, so it is already in force. Hence, the interpretation associated within it are applicable. To understand it better, before we go into the technical aspect of it, let's look at the case study. First case study is from a social scoring by government. It's a social credit system. The context here is the government has implemented a social credit system that scores individuals and businesses based on behaviors with consequences like travel restriction or access denial to service. From an EU perspective, such AI systems are explicitly banned in EU, regardless of the system's accuracy or intent. This is due to their inherent risk of discrimination, surveillance, and social manipulation. Now, do note the EU understands that the intent might be noble, the accuracy of the assessment of the tool might be high or to the point, but there is a chance that the system in future or similar systems in future can be used discriminately, can also be used for surveillance, and in some cases for manipulation. Hence, the system as a whole is explicitly banned in EU as per the AI Act. From a violations perspective, the EU AI Act prohibits AI systems that evaluates or classifies the trustworthiness of people based on behavior, status, or characteristics across different contexts. This is categorized as unacceptable risk under Article 5(1)(c). It's a violation of human dignity, fairness, and privacy. The second case is from a real-time biometric surveillance in public space. The context here is a police department pilots a real-time facial recognition system to monitor all citizens in public space for potential suspect without prior suspicion. From a EU perspective, unless strictly justified by law on a case-to-case basis, general biometric surveillance is banned in EU, and this is to preserve public freedom. So in general, this is banned. If there is a requirement, then it has to be on case-to-case basis with the checks and balances of approval from the right authority. From a violation perspective, use of biometric identification in publicly accessible space by law enforcement is prohibited except in narrowly defined and legally authorized situations. Do note here, it's a violation if done on a publicly accessible space, which means if it is privately, then these are not applicable in its full. Of course, there are certain categories within it. And when we say narrowly defined, this definition is on a case to case basis and would be defined by the right authority, which is the legal framework available in the country as per their definition. The risk classification in this case is unacceptable risk under Article 5(1)(d). It is because it violates privacy, autonomy, and can lead to mass surveillance. The next is emotion recognition in classroom. A tech company deploys an AI tool in a school that claims to detect students' emotional engagement during lessons using webcam analysis. From an EU AI Act perspective, this type of emotional profiling is prohibited in schools due to the risk of coercion, manipulation, and privacy invasion. It's a straight no. As per EU AI Act, it bans AI system for emotion recognition in educational institutions as they pose risk to the mental integrity, students' autonomy, and developmental freedom. This is particularly sensitive as it touches children. So the EU is very clear on this. The next case is where an AI based hiring tool is used but has a hidden discriminatory bias. The context is a recruitment firm uses an AI tool trained on a historical data that systematically deprioritizes applications from women and minority candidates, reinforcing existing biases. From an EU Act perspective, if it manipulates users or violates equality rights systematically and without transparency, it may be banned or heavily restricted under the AI Act. Do note in this case, it is may be banned or heavily restricted. Do remember earlier case where children were involved? That's a non-negotiable. It's a straight ban. In this case, it is a may be banned. In this case, the acts, while not explicitly unacceptable in all cases, if such a system exists which uses subliminal techniques, manipulates users, impacts rights through opaque discrimination, then it can be classified as unacceptable. In this case, the risk classification is potentially unacceptable risk under Article 5(1)(a) if manipulation is covert. Elsewhere, it would be a high risk requiring transparency, testing, and bias mitigation. So, why is this? Potentially. That's because the context here is on historical hiring data. So, if the data that was used for training this AI model had discrimination within it, the model would follow what it has learned. But then it has to be reviewed. If that is the case, it is an unacceptable risk. If it is not, if it is a clean, unbiased historical data, then it is not categorized as unacceptable, but it has to be reviewed. That's where the transparency aspect comes in. But since there is a potential, because when it was approved, when it was tested, it did not have any unbiased data, assuming. But then there is a potential that a new historical data or new data would be added for analysis, and that could change the character of that tool, making it unacceptable. So it could be a clean data without bias. In such case, the system would still be considered as a high risk. But since the system can be manipulated by using new set of hiring data which has biases, hence there is a case wherein a high risk AI can become an unacceptable risk also. So that's the context. So these are something which that need to be factored in when assessing where your tool is positioned. The next is a case of subliminal messaging in children's smart toys. The context is an AI enabled toy uses voice modulation and subliminal nudge to influence children's behavior like diet or product preference without parental awareness. Do note, the moment anything touches kids, children, it would be categorized as unacceptable risk from the EU AI perspective. This is a sensitive area. So it is an almost given that it is an unacceptable risk. Having said that, in this context, such manipulative AI in children's toy is explicitly banned, protecting vulnerable population from commercial or behavioral manipulation. This falls under Article 5(1)(a). AI systems that exploit vulnerabilities of children or use subliminal techniques that materially distorts behavior and cause harms are prohibited. This is an unacceptable risk due to the psychological manipulation and the loss of autonomy. Net net, if you have an AI application which touches children in any form and shape, it is most likely an unacceptable risk and it's prohibited. In summary, we have seen the 5 case studies. So what you see in now is the case study, the article and the section under which it becomes an unacceptable clause, and the key risk. The social scoring comes under discrimination and autonomy laws. The facial recognition comes under surveillance and privacy violation. The emotional recognition in school comes under the psychological manipulation. Hiring comes under the hidden discrimination. The smart toy with subliminal cues comes under the vulnerable population exploitation risk. With examples been discussed earlier, we have a potential better perspective about what an unacceptable risk looks like in different scenarios. Now let us look at the specific definition on unacceptable risk. It states AI systems deemed to pose an unacceptable risk are prohibited under the Act. This category includes applications that contravene EU values and fundamental rights, such as social scoring, which means AI systems that evaluate individuals based on their behavior or personal characteristics, leading to detrimental or unfavorable treatment. The second is manipulative techniques, wherein AI applications designed to manipulate human behavior in ways that can cause harm. Third, real-time biometric identification in public space, wherein the use of AI for real-time biometric identification such as facial recognition in publicly accessible area with certain exceptions to law and enforcement purposes. Deploying a subliminal, manipulative or deceptive techniques to distort behavior and impair informed decision making, which could cause significant harm, is categorized as prohibited system. Exploiting vulnerabilities related to age, disability, or social economic circumstances to distort behavior, causing significant harm, is prohibited. Social scoring, as discussed, wherein evaluating or classifying individuals or group based on social behavior or personal traits causing detrimental or unfavorable treatment of those people, are prohibited. Assessing the risk of an individual committing criminal offense solely based on profiling or personality traits, except when used to augment human assessment based on objective, verifiable fact directly linked to criminal activity, is considered as a prohibited AI system. A system where compiling facial recognition database by untargeted scraping of facial images from the internet or CCTV footage is also considered as a prohibited AI system. Inferring emotions in workplace or education institute except for medical or safety reasons is also a prohibited AI system. The biometric categorization system inferring sensitive attributes, which includes race, political opinion, trade union membership, religious or philosophical beliefs, sex lives, or sexual orientation, except labeling or filtering of lawfully acquired biometric database or when law enforcement categorizes biometric data, is a prohibited AI system. Real time remote biometric identification in publicly accessible space for law enforcement is prohibited except when the targeted searching for missing persons or about abduction victims and people who have been human trafficked or sexually exploited. These are not considered as prohibited, or a case where preventing specific, substantial, and imminent threat to a life or physical safety or foreseeable terrorist attack is factored in. This is not a prohibited system. Also, identifying suspects in serious crimes, example murder, rape, armed robberies, narcotics, illegal weapon trafficking, organized crime, and environmental crime, etc. These are also not considered as prohibited. Do remember, except for these conditions, any other real time remote biometric identification in publicly accessible space for law enforcement are prohibited. And specific to remote biometric identification, using AI enabled real time remote biometric identification is only allowed when not using the tool would cause a harm, particularly regarding the seriousness, probability, and the scale of such harm, and must account for affected person's right and freedom. Before deployment, police must complete a fundamental right impact assessment and register the system in the EU database. Though, in duly justified case of urgency, deployment can commence without registration provided that it is registered later without undue delay. So, this is a pure exception case. Before deployment, they also must obtain authorization from a judicial authority or independent administrative authority. Though, in duly justified cases of urgency, deployment can commence without authorization provided the authorization is requested within 24 hours. If authorization is rejected, deployment must cease immediately, deleting all data, results, and output. So, these are explicitly listed under the prohibited AI system, specifically for the biometric identification conditions under Chapter 2 of Article 5. We need to be conscious of it. We have now reached the end of part 2 of the EU AI Act, which is part of the ACGRC Series 2. As part of the series, part 1 covered areas wherein we introduced the basis of the Act, the background, and the legislative journey, the trigger for creating the EU Act. We looked at case studies, then we looked at key objectives and features of the AI Act, looked at, understood the scope and applicability. We also looked at the impact and the significance of the Act. That was part one. In part two, we looked at the risk based classification of the AI system, definition of what an unacceptable risk is all about as per the Act. We understood uh, what prohibitive AI system is as per Chapter 2 at Article 5. We looked at the details, the definition. We also understood that this Act, a section of this Act, has already been activated for implementation. It's actually in force as on 2nd February 2025. We have seen few case studies related to prohibited AI system. So that's where the part 1 and part 2 covered. The part 3 is going to be more detailed. We'll be looking at few more classifications on the systems. We'll be looking at details. We'll look at few case studies so that we understand the concept behind it. I hope this helps in for anyone who wants to start a career in risk management, in audit, in general management, managing regulators, especially the ones managing the EU AI Act. I hope this helps you in that journey to learn the details. Thank you very much for being with me till now. Much appreciated. See you in the next part. Thank you.